Borrowed your cheap necklace for my date. Thanks. My brother Nathan texted me without asking, without waiting for a response, with the casual entitlement of someone who spent his entire life assuming he could take whatever he wanted from me and that I would either say yes or wouldn't know enough to object. I was in my office in downtown Chicago, reviewing acquisition documents for a new luxury goods brand we were considering absorbing into our portfolio, and I looked at that text message and felt something crystallize in me, a recognition that despite everything I'd accomplished, despite the empire I'd built, despite the fact that I now controlled assets worth over $3 billion and employed more than 2,000 people globally, my brother still saw me as the same vulnerable girl he could manipulate and take from without consequence. I texted back, "Have fun," in a way that was perfectly calculated to seem casual and unbothered, while simultaneously pulling up my inventory management system and identifying exactly what he'd taken. Inventory item number 4429, 1 rare cashmere sapphire necklace, 47 carats, set in platinum with 18-carat white gold accents. A piece that had been authenticated by the Gemological Institute of America and valued at exactly $2 million as part of my company's collection of rare gemstones that we curate for ultra-high net worth collectors. Then I called my security team and told them very clearly, report theft of inventory item #4429, $2 million sapphire necklace. My brother Nathan Pemberton has removed it from the climate-controlled vault without authorization. This is a company asset, not personal property. I'm filing a police report. Locate his position immediately and have officers intercept him. He didn't know it was in my vault. He didn't know it was part of an authenticated, insured collection. He thought it was costume jewelry. My name is Olivia Pemberton, and I'm 43 years old, which means I've lived long enough to understand that the people who love you will sometimes underestimate you the most deliberately, and that the boundary between generosity and enabling is one that most families never learn to recognize until it's far too late. I come from a solidly middle-class family in the suburbs of Chicago, not wealthy by any stretch, but comfortable enough that my parents could provide educational opportunities and never had to worry about fundamental necessities being denied to us. My father, Robert Pemberton, was an accountant with a small practice that served local businesses. My mother, Susan, was a nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, working both day shifts and occasional evening shifts to help supplement our family's income. They had 3 children together, my older brother Nathan, who followed directly in my father's footsteps into accounting, my younger brother Thomas, who became a financial advisor at a mid-size brokerage firm, and then there was me, the only daughter, the one everyone had very specific expectations for. I was supposed to marry well and settle into a comfortable life of domesticity, raise 2.5 children, volunteer at the country club, and become the kind of woman my mother's generation had been trained to aspire to become. That was the trajectory everyone assumed I'd follow, and it was reinforced constantly through both explicit statements and subtle social cues. I was attractive in the way that society values, blonde, blue-eyed, thin, conventionally feminine, and I'd been conditioned from childhood to understand that my primary value would be in finding a good husband who could provide for me, someone established and ambitious who could elevate my status through marriage. My mother had said more than once during my teenage years that I was too pretty to be too ambitious, which was her way of saying that ambition would actually reduce my attractiveness in the marriage market and would therefore be counterproductive to my actual goals in life. But even as a child, I was curious about business in ways that didn't fit the trajectory laid out for me. I was fascinated by how companies worked, how they created value, how they built markets and captured them. While my brothers were playing football and baseball, I was reading business books borrowed from the library. While they were dating in high school and worried about social hierarchies, I was interning at local businesses, a real estate firm, a retail management company, a boutique marketing agency, trying to understand how the machinery of commerce actually functioned beneath the surface that most people saw. My parents supported my education, or at least they said they did, but they expressed serious doubts about whether a career should really be my focus. My mother repeatedly suggested that I should get married first and then decide about working, as though those were somehow sequential life events with a specific order rather than independent choices I could make for myself. My father questioned whether I was truly prepared for the competitiveness of the business world, which was code, very thin code, for whether a woman could handle it. My brothers made jokes about my ambition, suggesting that I was trying too hard or that I was going to scare off potential husbands with all that career talk. I went to Northwestern University anyway, despite their suggestions that I attend a smaller school that might be less demanding and therefore more appropriate for a woman. I studied business with a focus on luxury goods and consumer behavior, understanding intuitively that this was a sector where taste and relationship building mattered as much as financial acumen. I graduated summa cum laude with honors. I got a job at a luxury goods company called Ashford & Pemberton, a boutique firm that specialized in rare gemstones and fine jewelry, serving ultra-high net worth collectors and institutions. The job was supposed to be temporary, something to do while I waited for marriage, a way to have interesting work experience that would make me seem cultured and engaged. But I discovered very quickly that I was actually exceptional at this work. I could identify which pieces would appreciate in value over time. I could understand what wealthy collectors were looking for before they could articulate it themselves. I could negotiate with suppliers in countries most Americans couldn't locate on a map. I could build relationships with clients that lasted decades and generated enormous loyalty. Within 5 years, I was the vice president of acquisitions. Within 10 years, I was being actively groomed for the CEO position by the current leadership. When the CEO retired at the age of 72, I applied for the job. There were other candidates, all men, all with extensive experience in the luxury goods sector, but the board of directors voted unanimously for me. I became the CEO of Ashford and Pemberton at 32 years old, making me one of the youngest CEOs in the luxury goods industry at that time and definitely the only woman leading a company of our size and prestige. What happened next was that I systematically transformed the company from the inside out. I expanded internationally into markets that other luxury companies weren't accessing effectively. I built relationships with rare gemstone suppliers in Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, and Colombia, relationships that took years to cultivate but that gave us access to inventory that our competitors couldn't obtain. I created a collection of authenticated, investment-grade gemstones that became a status symbol among ultra-high net worth individuals and institutional collectors. I positioned Ashford and Pemberton not just as a jewelry company or a luxury goods retailer, but as an asset management firm for people who wanted their wealth to be beautiful and appreciative over time. I also revolutionized how we authenticated and valued pieces. I brought in gemologists with PhDs. I established relationships with independent appraisers who had international credentials. I created a digital system for tracking provenance and authentication. I turned jewelry into data, understanding that ultra-wealthy collectors wanted verification, wanted certainty, wanted to know that their investments would hold value. Within 15 years, I'd taken the company from a $200 million enterprise generating about $20 million in annual profits to a $3 billion enterprise generating over $400 million in annual profits. I'd made myself extraordinarily wealthy in the process. My net worth was approximately $1.2 billion based on my ownership stake in the company, which had more than tripled since I took over. I had built something from nothing, or rather, from something very small and undistinguished, and transformed it into an empire that was respected internationally. My family's response to this extraordinary success was significantly more complicated than you might expect. My father was proud but mystified, as though I'd accomplished something incomprehensible to him, something that defied his understanding of how the world actually worked. He would attend company events and introduce me to people as my daughter, the CEO, with a tone that suggested he was still slightly shocked by this reality. My mother gradually shifted from suggesting I should focus on marriage and motherhood to bragging about my career to her friends while simultaneously implying that I'd somehow failed at the most important part of being a woman by not being married with children. She would say things like, "Olivia's CEO of a billion-dollar company, but she doesn't have a family," in the tone of someone who was impressed and disappointed in equal measure. My brothers were supportive of my success, or at least they said they were, but in a way that sometimes felt deeply condescending. They would make comments that were positioned as compliments but felt more like qualifications, that's impressive, for a woman. You did really well, especially considering you started in the jewelry business, which isn't exactly known for being competitive. It must be nice to have made it in such a small industry. These comments suggested that my success was impressive only within the limited context of being a woman or being in a boutique industry, not impressive in absolute terms. What I began to notice as my career became more successful and my wealth increased significantly was that my family stopped seeing me as someone who was building something extraordinary through intelligence and hard work and started seeing me as someone who had access to extraordinary things. I became a resource to them, a person with valuable connections and valuable possessions and valuable financial resources. They started asking for favors constantly. Could I get them discounts on jewelry? Could I recommend rare pieces for their wives? Could I help them with investment advice? Could I introduce them to wealthy clients who might want to invest with them? Could I use my corporate discount to help them purchase luxury goods? I obliged most of these requests. I was generous with my time and my resources. I gave my mother a piece from my personal collection for her 50th birthday, a beautiful emerald necklace worth approximately $300,000, a stunning Colombian emerald set with diamonds. I helped my father restructure his investment portfolio and introduced him to financial advisors who could manage his wealth more effectively. I introduced my brothers to potential business partners and clients who could help them advance their careers. I positioned myself as the successful sibling who had accumulated resources and was willing to share them with family members who needed support. But what I didn't realize, what I was too naive to recognize, was that I was systematically training my family to see those resources not as gifts given generously but as things they could access at will, without asking permission, without respecting the fundamental boundaries between what was mine personally and what was theirs. I was teaching them, through my willingness to help, that they had a claim on my resources, that asking was optional, that taking what they needed was acceptable. My brothers started making increasingly casual comments about my wealth. Comments like "must be nice to just buy anything you want without thinking about the cost," or "I should have gone into jewelry instead of accounting. Then I'd be loaded too," or "you don't know how good you have it, never having to worry about money." Comments that were framed as joking but had an unmistakable undertone of resentment, as though my success was somehow a reflection on their comparative failure, as though I'd done something wrong or unfair by building something more substantial than what they'd built. My mother started suggesting, with increasing directness, that since I had so much money, I should be more generous with my family. She made comments about how she'd raised me and made sacrifices for my education, comments that seemed to imply that I owed her something more substantial than the considerable support and attention I was already providing. She would say things like, "After everything I did for you, I would hope you'd remember your family when you're successful," which was her way of saying that my success created obligations to her specifically. And my brothers started taking things. It started small, innocuously, in ways that seemed unworthy of confrontation. Nathan borrowed money, $5,000, to cover a business shortfall, and didn't repay it with the consistency I expected or on the timeline he agreed to. Thomas asked to use one of my cars for a weekend and returned it with damage he never reported, damage that cost $4,000 to repair. They would take things from my office when they visited, expensive pens worth $200 each, small decorative objects, business books, things that seemed trivial but that I hadn't offered to them. They operated under the clear assumption that they had the right to take these things because we were family, and I didn't challenge them because I told myself that the items were replaceable. That the money didn't matter to me, that being flexible about these things was what family was supposed to do. I was training my brothers, through my silence and my inaction, to assume they could take from me without asking. I was doing it through my willingness to overlook boundary violations. I was enabling the very behavior that would eventually become intolerable. The necklace was fundamentally different from everything else, though I didn't fully understand that until much later. It was a rare cashmere sapphire, 47 carats, one of the rarest and most valuable colors of sapphire in existence, a deep blue that seemed to contain the entire spectrum of the color within its depths, the kind of blue that only exists in sapphires from the Kashmir region. The necklace had been authenticated by the Gemological Institute of America with specific documentation about the stone's origin, quality, and characteristics. The piece had been professionally valued at $2 million by 3 independent appraisers who specialized in rare gemstones. It was part of my company's investment collection, a curated selection of pieces that we held for appreciation and for sale to specific collectors. I was planning to sell this particular necklace to a collector in Dubai who had already agreed to purchase it for $2.2 million, representing a solid return on investment and fulfilling a standing order that this client had placed months earlier. The necklace was stored in my personal vault, a climate-controlled, security-monitored space in my home where I kept the most valuable pieces from my private collection and pieces that belonged to the company but were stored at my residence for security purposes. The vault was located in the basement of my home, encrypted with biometric security, requiring both my fingerprint and a code that I changed monthly. It was supposed to be completely secure, completely private, accessible only to me. I have no idea how Nathan got into the vault. I have to assume he watched me enter the code at some point during one of his visits to my home, or that he figured it out through systematic trial and error, or that someone at the company, perhaps an employee he cultivated a relationship with, had told him about the access or helped him gain access. It doesn't actually matter now how he did it. What matters is that he took it, without asking, without permission, with the casual assumption that he had access to everything I had, that my resources were somehow family resources that he could utilize as needed, that I wouldn't even notice or care that it was gone. His text made it abundantly clear that he thought the necklace was costume jewelry, cheap jewelry that I wore casually, and that wouldn't matter if he borrowed it for a date. Cheap necklace is what he called it in his message, a $2 million asset that represented months of negotiations with suppliers, years of relationship building with this particular collector. A piece of authenticated investment-grade property that belonged to my company and was fully insured and cataloged in our system. I texted back "have fun" while simultaneously pulling up my inventory system and confirming the specific details of what he'd taken. I verified the authentication documents. I confirmed the valuation. I checked the insurance status. I confirmed that this was indeed company property, not personal property, which made this theft rather than just a boundary violation between siblings. Then I called my security team, something I'd only done a handful of times since establishing this protocol years earlier. I told them that I needed to report an inventory theft. I told them that my brother had removed a $2 million piece of jewelry from my secured vault without authorization. I told them that I wanted this treated as a serious matter, reported to authorities, and investigated thoroughly. I asked them to locate his position and provide that information to police. The security team identified Nathan's location through the GPS tracking system on one of my vehicles. He was driving one of my cars because I always allowed my family to borrow my vehicles, another boundary that I'd never properly established. He was at an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago called Alinea, one of the most exclusive and expensive dining experiences available in the city, somewhere that would require significant advance booking and would cost hundreds of dollars per person. He was, quite literally, taking a $2 million necklace to dinner to impress someone, thinking it was costume jewelry, using my car to get there, operating under the assumption that he had unlimited access to all of my resources. When I reported the theft to the police, I was very clear and very formal about what had happened. I explained that my brother had taken a company asset worth $2 million without authorization. I explained that the piece was meant for a specific sale to a collector who was waiting to receive it, and that his removal of it was creating significant financial liability for the company and potential legal liability with the client. I explained that I wanted to press charges for theft, that I wanted this investigated as a criminal matter, that I was not going to allow family relationship to override the seriousness of this act. The police responded within an hour. Officers arrived at the restaurant where Nathan was dining with his date. They informed him that he was being investigated for theft of a $2 million piece of jewelry. They asked him to return the necklace immediately and informed him that he was being taken into custody pending further investigation and potential charges. The situation was humiliating in ways that I hadn't fully anticipated when I made the call to report it as theft. Nathan's date was shocked and horrified and confused. The other diners at the restaurant were shocked, and the scene quickly became the kind of dinner party story that would circulate through Chicago's social circles for years. Restaurant staff were uncomfortable, not knowing how to handle this situation. Within hours, the story had spread through Chicago social and business circles and eventually reached the media. Woman reports brother for theft of $2 million necklace was one of the headlines. Another was CEO presses charges against brother over borrowed jewelry. A third was family feud, sapphire necklace worth $2 million at center of criminal case. What the media coverage didn't capture was the complexity of what had happened or the conversations I had with my family members in the days immediately after Nathan was detained. My mother called me, her voice shaking with anger and disappointment, asking how I could possibly do this to my brother. How could I report him to the police? How could I humiliate him in front of his date? How could I prioritize a piece of jewelry over family? How could I destroy his reputation and career prospects by involving the criminal justice system? She asked these questions as though I was the one who'd done something wrong by pressing charges instead of Nathan being in the wrong for stealing from his sister. My father called and asked if there was a way to quietly drop the charges, to resolve this without it becoming a legal matter that would damage the family's reputation. He suggested that Nathan had made a mistake, that he hadn't understood the necklace was valuable company property, that I should have been clearer about what was off limits and what could be accessed freely. He implied that this was partially my fault for not establishing boundaries clearly enough. Thomas called and offered to help, asking what he could do to support me, making it clear that he understood this was serious and that Nathan had crossed a significant line. I told my parents both, no. I told them that Nathan had taken company property without permission. I told them that the fact that he was my brother didn't make it acceptable, didn't make it any less a crime, didn't create some familial exception to the law. I told them that I'd been too lenient with boundary violations for years, that I'd allowed my family to treat my resources as though they belonged to everyone, that this was where that pattern ended. I told them that I was done being taken advantage of because of family relationship. Nathan eventually negotiated a plea deal where he agreed to reimburse the company $2 million for the value of the necklace in quarterly installments over 10 years, and the charges were reduced from felony theft to unauthorized taking of property, which is a lesser charge. He had to sell his house in order to make the initial down payment and secure the payment arrangement. He had to restructure his entire financial life to meet the payment obligations. His credit was damaged. His reputation was damaged. His career prospects were affected. It was genuinely devastating for him. And I could feel my family's anger at me for not protecting him, for not covering for him, not using my wealth and influence to shield him from consequences the way they expected I should. What they didn't understand, what they still don't understand, even years later, is that protecting him from consequences was exactly what had enabled him to believe he could take from me without permission. My generosity, my willingness to help, my tendency to overlook boundary violations, had been interpreted as permission. My willingness to loan money and gift expensive items and overlook theft of smaller items had been interpreted as acceptance that these violations were acceptable parts of our family dynamic. The necklace incident created a rupture in my family relationships that I don't think will ever fully heal, and I've had to make peace with that reality. My parents have been cordial but distant since then. My mother occasionally brings it up in conversations, suggesting that I overreacted, that I should have just given Nathan the necklace or talked to him privately rather than involving law enforcement. She frames it as me being hard, as me prioritizing money over family, as me having been poisoned by success into forgetting where I came from. My father has stopped asking me for financial advice or asking me to introduce him to people in my professional network. He seems to resent me for not protecting my brother, for choosing professional obligation over family obligation. Nathan has apologized, but his apology carries the tone of someone who thinks I was wrong and is only apologizing to try to restore the relationship and repair his reputation, not because he actually understands what he did or why it was wrong. He suggested multiple times that I was overreacting, that it was just a necklace, that family members help each other out, that I should have handled it privately if I had a problem with him borrowing something. He seems to believe that I wronged him by pressing charges rather than believing he wronged me by taking company property without permission. Thomas, my younger brother, actually understood. He called me after the incident and told me that he appreciated what I'd done, that he understood why I had to press charges, that watching Nathan face actual consequences for his actions had forced him to confront his own assumptions about my resources and my willingness to share them. He apologized for the times he borrowed things or assumed he could access my resources without asking permission. He acknowledged that he'd been benefiting from the same pattern of boundary violations that had enabled Nathan to feel comfortable taking the necklace. With Thomas, I've been able to rebuild a healthier relationship based on mutual respect and clear boundaries. With Nathan, that hasn't happened because he never acknowledged that what he did was wrong or understood why I had to respond the way I did. But more importantly, something fundamental shifted in how I treated myself and my boundaries after that incident. I realized that I'd been allowing people to take from me because I believed that money and success were supposed to make me generous. That having more than enough wealth meant I was supposed to be endlessly available to help people, that saying no would make me seem selfish or ungracious or cold. I realized that I internalized messaging from my childhood that positioned my value in my willingness to be helpful and accommodating, and that I never fully deprogrammed from that conditioning. The truth is that having boundaries around your resources isn't selfish. It's necessary. It's how you maintain your autonomy. It's how you teach people to respect you. It's how you prevent being exploited. I started being more deliberate about what I shared and with whom. I reduced the financial support I was providing my parents because I realized that ongoing support was actually enabling unhealthy dynamics rather than helping them achieve independence. I stopped loaning money to my brothers, stopped introducing them to business contacts, stopped offering my professional advice and resources. I stopped feeling obligated to attend every family event or spend every holiday with my family just because we shared genetic material. I built a chosen family of people who respected my boundaries and celebrated my success without trying to access it or diminish it or make me feel guilty about it. I invested my energy and time in relationships that were reciprocal rather than extractive, relationships where people gave as much as they received. The necklace itself eventually became part of my company's origin story and institutional lore. The piece ended up remaining in my personal collection, a $2 million reminder of the moment when I finally stopped accepting the assumption that my resources were available for anyone to take without consequences. It hangs in my private office, now visible to anyone I invite into that space, and I tell the story to young women who are building businesses and struggling with boundaries. Struggling with family pressure, struggling with the guilt that comes from saying no to people who love you. I tell them, your success makes you a target for people who want to access what you've built without building anything themselves. Your generosity will be taken advantage of. Your boundaries will be tested. And the only way to maintain your autonomy is to protect it fiercely, even when that protection is directed at people you love, even when that protection costs you family relationships that feel important. My brother learned that lesson through a criminal investigation and a $2 million debt. But more importantly, I learned it too. I learned that respecting my own boundaries is not a betrayal of family. It's a commitment to myself. And that commitment is worth more than any family relationship built on the assumption that I exist to provide access to my resources. The police report about the $2 million necklace was the beginning of me finally understanding my own worth, not just in terms of financial net worth or professional achievement, but in terms of what I deserved in my relationships and how I should be treated by people who claimed to love me. And that understanding was worth every bit of family drama that followed.